Hey, we are live. Well, hello, friends. I forgot to put the chat on screen in time, so just gonna pop that always on top. All right. Okay, we are live. Hopefully, you can hear me and see me and all of those things. It is Friday. It is 4 p.m. Swedish time, so time for SerenityOS office hours. Wow, it's so disorienting when I forget one little detail and then I forget everything else as well. But we should get back on track here. All right, so many people in the chat already. Hello, everybody. Hope you're having a good week. Sup, Jeja, Matthew, JCS in the house. Fausto Tomasi, Isaltino de Souza. Sophia says we can hear. Very good. Sup, everybody. Okay, so yeah, it's just another Friday, and we are going to do what we do on Fridays, which is to talk about SerenityOS and the surrounding projects. Me personally, I've been working mostly on Yakt in the past week, so today was the first day in several days when I touched Serenity code because I wanted to I wanted to see if I could get ChatGPT to load in Ladybird, and we're currently thwarted by this Cloudflare, I guess like anti DDoS protection or whatever it is, and at the start of the day we couldn't load the page at all. We just got an error, so I fixed some things, and now we kind of get to this point, and as you can see here in the background, we are getting unhandled JavaScript exceptions. And basically, they're throwing a bunch of obfuscated JavaScript at us to see if we are a human. And it's very, very obfuscated, and it's going to take some time to figure out what it's actually doing. But the end result of it right now is that it produces a string of garbage text and then tells us to execute that as if it is JavaScript, and then we just syntax error because it's garbage. So that's something I started looking at today. Let's see. There's a question up here from Isaltino asking, how about implementing QOI image format in Yakt? You can absolutely do that. I think based on my success in implementing the PNG format, I don't see why QOI should be any different. I think for my own personal purposes, like I was doing the PNG decoder as an exercise mostly to sort of discover if we had everything we needed to build that, and then I wanted to gather information about what was missing in the language to make implementing and stuff like image decoders pleasant. And I found a bunch of things that were unpleasant, so I have been working towards making them better, and that's kind of been the motivating force behind what I was working on all week, just fixing little irritating things that if you spend all day writing Yakt like I've been doing, then you sort of learn to dance around little potholes, but there are quite a bunch of them, and you get blinded to them if you're dancing around them all day. So just trying to put in a actual conscious effort to fill in the potholes. Anyway, V says, hey there, chilling while writing a renderer for my PSX emulator. That sounds pretty cool. Let's see. Yes, Jessica says, in Yakt, does unsafe have a practical purpose in terms of cogen now or in the future, or is it just a mark of here be dragons, a signpost for debugging? So unsafe basically gives you access to a couple of things that you don't have access to outside of unsafe blocks. The main one, I guess, being that you can dereference a raw pointer in unsafe context. If you are in a safe context, which is a default context, you cannot dereference raw pointers because we don't know what might be there, right? So if you have a raw pointer and you know through some Oracle process that you participate in, that it's safe to dereference the raw pointer, then you can do that in an unsafe block. But and then there are a couple of other things as well that we would let you do in an unsafe block, such as call unsafe functions. So that's something that I did in a video this week, adding support for marking functions as unsafe. And the basic idea is that an unsafe function annotation just means that this function may do something that the compiler can't know is safe. So if you want to call this function, you have to say that you're okay with doing something happening that the compiler can't see, basically. So it's not a signpost for debugging. It's actually unsafe is about like giving the language access to things that it can't verify are correct. And obviously we want to have as little of that as possible. In Yakt, maybe the most common use of unsafe right now is actually inline C++ blocks. So you can write inline C++ in Yakt, which is a very unusual thing, but it's something that we support. So if you wanted to, you could make an unsafe CPP block and say, you know, something like that. And that's obviously not very good, but because it's unsafe, we let you do it. And here in CPP blocks, you can put whatever you want, and we just pass it right through to the C++ compiler. Oops, that's the link to this live stream. All right. Let's see. Jaja said, now when working in an office and having office hours, the name of the stream is very suitable, but can't really join as often because of being in the office working. Well, I am, you know, that's nice and not nice at the same time. I hope that you find peace in your office environment. When I was a kid, I used to love visiting my parents when they worked in an office, which they did not when I was very young. Then they had slightly less office-y jobs, at least my father. But when he got older, he also worked in an office, and I used to love going to the office. I always thought offices are awesome. Not everybody agrees with that, but I always had this exciting feeling about being in an office or having office supplies available. Matthew said, I just contributed to the repo for the first time. Are there any extensions you use for C-Line that you find very helpful? I actually forget if I have extensions installed. Let me check. Whatever I have installed, I think I am so used to it that I don't even realize it's an extension anymore. Plugins. Installed. Right, so I have the One Dark theme. Maybe that's the only relevant thing I have installed, actually. Yeah, everything else seems kind of bundled. Yeah, it's a one download extension. I just have a theme, so it seems like I don't really use any extensions. But glad to hear about your first contribution. Very, very cool. Oops. JCS says, I noticed in your last Yakt video that you use FNA, but I remember early on you were using function and really wanted expressive keywords to be used. Did something change your opinion? Yes, absolutely. The thing that changed was that the text was just growing really wide horizontally, and stuff was just falling off the right edge of the screen so often. And the most commonly in function declarations. And it just seemed like it's so wide, the word function. And I think originally I thought, you know what, like verbose expressive keywords are great, but because we have the style and Serenity of verbose expressive names for everything. But the more I thought about it, I realized that it's not about every word being like verbose and expressive. It's about the identifiers. So if you give a name to a variable or a function, you want that to be as expressive as possible so that it's clear what it does. But it's it's less important that language keywords that you use all the time are like excruciatingly verbose, right? Like they don't need to be. Whereas the name of a function that you really need to understand what it does, it's important that that thing has a very clear name. So I guess it kind of changed or matured my perspective on that. I used to think that everything should be verbose, and I came to feel like what's important is like variable names and function names. Jeje says Andreas should move to India so his office hours would be when I'm home. You know, if I moved to India, I would probably become very large because they have amazing food. So it is suddenly tempting. Let's see. Kyle said, do you deal with imposter syndrome? If so, how? It has been a while since I worked on Yakt, and I'm tripping on what used to be trivial for me. I used to definitely deal with imposter syndrome. When I was younger, I had multiple chips on my shoulders about various things. Not going to university was one of them. I would feel like, oh, all of my coworkers have been to university and I haven't. They are better at this than I am, more knowledgeable and so on. And it was like constantly screwing me up. But I think over time, with age, I just grew to realize that although we had taken different paths, we were now peers. And I had a lot of skills that they didn't have. They had a lot of skills that I didn't have. And that is normal. And it's actually a good thing, right? Like, you don't want everybody in a team to have the exact same skills. You want a diverse set of skills, right? So what was once a chip on my shoulder, eventually I started to think of as an asset, I guess, that I had. Just a different perspective on many things. And I think the older I get, the more I reflect on how nice it is to get older. At least in my life, getting older just means thinking more clearly and slowing down what used to be a kind of stressed out, hyperactive brain. And I hope that anybody who has the same types of issues that I've had, that they get to experience a pleasant aging process as well. To your question specifically, or your topic specifically, like if you feel like, oh, you haven't been working on Yakt for a while and now you feel a bit lost, that's totally normal. Like I didn't work on Yakt for a while, for several weeks, and I was a bit lost when I picked it up. But I just had to start working in some corner, and eventually I started finding my way around again. And with stuff like that, it's just, you just have to jump into the water and you'll see that you remember how to swim. But if you stand hesitating at the edge, the water is going to seem so cold and so overwhelming, and just jump in. It's going to be okay. James Pulio says, well, hello, Kling. Which mug is up at bat today? So today we are enjoying an Earl Grey tea in the Yak Overflow brand cup. Burak says, what do you recommend to study for developing a programming language to beginners? I don't know, honestly. Yakt is the first time I tried to make a language, and I had a lot of help from JT and others. So I'm definitely not an expert on language design, and I have no idea where you would go as a beginner to learn about this. Or if it's a language for beginners, I don't know about what to study. I haven't studied this at all. I just, I'm a very blue collar programmer, I guess you could say. As I was saying, like I've never been to to school for this stuff. I just learned it from the internet and from books. So don't know the answer better than that, sorry. JCS said, my favorite stores as a kid were office supply stores and stationery stores. I loved all the stamps and business carbon forms and stuff. Yes, exactly. Exactly. I love that stuff too. I was just telling my mom earlier today that when I was a kid, my mom always had office supplies at home because she worked from home sometimes. And so she had like office stationery and post-it notes and paper clips and pens and stuff. And I kind of grew up thinking that this is just something that everybody has at home. And it's totally normal to have office supplies at home. And it was a bit weird when I was like moved out and alone in the world for the first time, and I had to pay for office supplies. That was weird. I thought it was just this thing that you had somehow. Anyway. Ooh, let's see. Sam Atkins says, well, hello, friends. Listening while working on something that I won't describe because I might give up on it. Wow, that is a brittle motivation. I recognize that feeling. I definitely do the same thing. Sometimes I just work on something where I feel like if I just tell anybody about this, I'll lose interest in working on it. So I just sit quietly here and hack away. Usually it comes out good though. Let's see. Isaltino says, I ask because the QOI image format is much easier than PNG. I think it will be a good video to watch. Sure. I would watch your video about that, Isaltino. Let's see. Linus is trying to bait Sam into joining office hours. Ooh, that would be quite something. Sam, no pressure, but you are definitely welcome to join me here and talk about it anytime. Maybe that was a little bit of pressure. I'm sorry, Sam. I don't mean to pressure you. There's no pressure. But that would be really fun. And actually, I announced earlier today on Discord that we're gonna do a new community showcase video. And this time, I thought we could try a bit longer videos. So in the past, I've asked for like relatively short videos, like up to 30 seconds was what I was asking. But some people sent like a minute, and that was totally fine. But I thought this time we could do maybe up to 8 minutes or something like that, so that we could get some more, in-depth looks at cool things that people are working on. Because looking back on the community showcase videos that we've done so far, I felt like these things are so interesting. Like, why don't I get to learn more about them? Like, it feels like everything just flashes by so fast. So, if anybody who's listening, who's working on something in SerenityOS, or if you worked on anything in the last 4 months since we did the last video, come to the community showcase channel on Discord if you want to maybe show off what you've been doing and participate in the video montage. Let's see. Matthew said, what's your history with car talk videos? Did they start during commutes, and were you driving before/during/after recording one? The car talk videos started when I was commuting. I used to commute an hour, almost an hour every day. And I just somehow figured out the idea that, hey, I can make this a bit more fun by just turning on the recording and just talking while driving. And it made commutes a little nicer. And it was a good routine to have because the commute was pretty mindless. Just, driving straight highway for 40 minutes and then a bit of navigation before and after. And then the lockdowns and stuff like that started happening, and we were told to work from home. So I stopped commuting, and then it sort of morphed into car talk, and I tried to figure out reasons to go to the car and talk anyway. But over time it kind of fizzled, and I always keep thinking I want to get back to it, but I don't know how to get back into that routine that came with like the daily commute. It was a good routine in many ways, but I would never want to commute again if I can avoid it. I just want the one nice side effect of it. Yeah, so that's kind of what that is. And I do want to make more car videos, definitely, and I will, but I don't have anything natural putting me in the car. So now it's like a totally manual thing where I have to decide, hey, I'm gonna go to the car and sit there and talk in the cold. Anyway, Brayden says, thank you for all the excellent videos. I'm also learning about writing languages. How do you resolve identifiers and nested scopes in Yakt? That's a good question. I think... Oh, this is something I haven't looked at for a while. So I think we have this concept called a scope, and you are always in some kind of scope. And scope is a little bit of a fluffy concept in Yakt in the compiler, because a scope can be like a block scope in a function, but I think a scope can also be like the scope of members of a class. So those things should probably be split apart into separate types, but right now I think it is scope. Yeah, this class scope here has a whole bunch of responsibilities, and it also has a vars. So this is the variables in that scope, and then that's the name, and then that's the variable ID that you can use to look it up in the program variable registry. And it is pretty simple, I guess, because you always know what scope you're in. So when you're trying to resolve a variable, you just look at the nearest scope and check, do I have a variable with this name in the current scope? If not, go up to the parent scope. Parent scope, I would assume, is here. Yeah, so here is the scope ID for the parent, and the scope ID you use to look it up in our program scope registry. So you can walk the chain of parent scopes until you get to the root scope, and if you haven't found the name, then it's not a known variable. Ali says, not sure how you can split scope to multiple classes. A scope is a scope. Right. No, I mean, does a scope, like a block scope in a function, should that be the same thing as the scope of a struct or class? I don't know. It just feels like it has so many things in it. Maybe I am over concerned about that. I don't know. That's a conversation that you and I can have on Discord. But yeah, like whenever something is really large and has a bunch of responsibilities like this, it just feels like you should at least ask the question, is this thing oversubscribed? Let's see. German WTB says, have you ever worked at a startup? Well, I guess I have worked at small companies, and I worked at one very small company, which I guess technically was a startup, but it wasn't like glitzy and glamorous like like most startups. At least startups today, I feel like they try to present themselves as like this glitzy, glamorous, cool thing, or this like high pace, high action environment. And the startup I worked at was like in 2003, 2004. I was just a kid, and we were not making a lot of money. We didn't have any venture capital or anything like that. We were just making websites for local businesses. But it was, in some ways, I guess you could call it a startup. And it was probably the least nice job I ever had. For many reasons. Anyway, let's see. Graham Winchester says I could green screen the car. Ooh. Now, here's a thinking man. That's kind of that's an interesting idea. I feel like you would figure it out, but maybe it doesn't matter. Just have to get a nice nice high quality wide angle shot of the car interior and set it up like this. That could be something. Maybe I'll try to do that. But there's something also about sitting in the car that just makes it easier to talk about something random at length. When I'm sitting here, it's just a different space, you know? When I'm in the car, I'm alone. I'm put myself in some parking lot or something and just drift into thought for half an hour and try to record that. And here, it's harder to do that somehow. I don't know why. But I could try. I remember years ago, I was thinking a lot. I used to think a lot more about like, oh, what kind of videos can I make for YouTube? And I was thinking, like, I would see these channels sometimes where people just comment on like every tech news story that comes out, and they just make a video for like 10 minutes and 2 seconds where they just basically tell you what the news story is and then give some light commentary on it. And I was like entertaining the idea for a moment, thinking like, oh, I could make those kind of videos. I would just sit at the computer and like summarize news stories for people. But then I didn't do that because it seemed like I didn't want to become that version of myself. I don't know. I didn't like him. I just needed to taste the idea for a few minutes before realizing that was not for me. Anyway, Graham says, I know the feeling, driving to random places with my partner and just talking about random things. Right? That's awesome. We do that a lot. My wife and I, we just sometimes just drive around a little bit and listen to music and chat about stuff. There's something really cozy about it. Definitely a bit annoying that the gas prices are getting higher and higher because it makes it so that you don't want to do that type of thing as much, maybe, but it is still real nice. Anyway, let's see. I feel like I probably missed something. Let's see. German WTB also said better than verbose expressive keywords is very few keywords. I mean, yeah, you don't want to have like bloat in terms of keywords that don't need to be there. You want every keyword to communicate something that matters. I think that's important. But it's also obviously possible to make the language too terse, and I don't want Yakt to be symbol soup. I want it to be very readable, but you have to find a balance, I guess. And the best way to find the balance for stuff like this, I think, is to actually use the language, write a lot of it, see how it feels. See how it feels mechanically when you watch the code take shape in front of your eyes. Not just look at code that somebody else wrote, but like to really get into the feeling of writing it yourself. And then that's when you really discover how it should work. Tim says, example where two distinct keywords probably wouldn't have hurt. Static and static. Yes. The C language family has a weird, understandable, but still weird tendency to just reuse keywords. And the reasoning I've heard, I don't know if this is the whole reasoning, maybe there's more to it, but like basically to minimize the chance of breaking compatibility with some code base somewhere out there, if you just reuse a keyword, you know that nobody called their variable that, right? And sure, I mean, I can see why that works, but it does create a weirdly overloaded language over time, which C++ has definitely become a bit overloaded in the keywords department. Andy says, how does type ID and module ID work in Yakt? So I don't, do you mean like how does the ID, how do they work, the ID classes? So the ID classes are essentially strongly typed integers. So if we look for what is a type ID, for example, I think my frickin' type lookup doesn't work. It's probably a struct. Yeah, I need to fix the type lookup. So it has a module and an ID, and I guess the module ID is then, maybe that's the thing that's actually a strongly typed integer. Module ID. Yeah, that's a strongly typed usize. So this was kind of the system that we came up with for having distinct names for integer types, was just to wrap them in an something ID class like this, or a struct. Now the module ID, I'm not super current on how the module implementation actually works. I know how to use it, but I haven't actually interacted much with the implementation of external modules. But essentially, it's just a strongly typed integer. The module ID is a strongly typed integer, and then how did I even do that? Okay. And then the function ID or var ID or type ID, they're an integer with an associated module ID. And we use those to key into, let's see, get type, for example, or get struct. So if you're looking up a struct, then this is hard to read here, but get struct goes to the structs related module. So indexing into the modules array with the struct ID's module ID. And then that module has a array of structures which we key into. So it's just getting the struct with that ID from that module's list of structs. And it's kind of like JT calls it an interning system. I guess it's kind of like that. And the idea being that instead of passing around the entire struct, you can just pass around the ID, and you're effectively just passing around integers everywhere. Now, that's not the only way you could solve that, of course. You could also pass around references. But given that we don't have sophisticated tools yet for working with the lifetimes of references, it is it's a little bit easier to just pass around IDs and then use those to look up in the list of structs, list of types, list of modules, whatever. Anyways, that was my slightly groggy explanation of how the ID lookup system works. Happy to take questions about that. We can try to figure it out. Jared says, how does the SerenityOS kernel do graphics? Does it draw to a frame buffer? Essentially, the kernel doesn't do the graphics itself, but it allows user space to map graphics memory. And in our case, we are just exposing frame buffers. Yeah, so we support a couple of different graphics adapters, but in all cases, we are just exposing ways to map their memory as a user space memory region. And then our Windows Server program is actually the thing that draws into that. Let's see. Ali says, Rust people would tell you that even a sophisticated enough reference lifetime system would prevent you from doing what this foo ID thingy allows. Yes, well, I think it's interesting that people come to the Yakt channels on our Discord server every so often. Somebody pops in, and you can kind of tell that they're very into Rust, and they think that um, we should make Yakt more like Rust, or whatever we're doing that's not Rust like. That's something that needs fixing, and I think it's always interesting to see that, because every time lately I was looking a bit more at Rust, and it just feels like such a ceremonious language, if that makes sense. Like you have to do so much ceremony, and I like that in Yakt that there's very little ceremony, and I hope that we can keep it that way. Um, but that's not to say that I have any issue with people who like Rust. I feel like I always have to always have to qualify this, because it is a very um, very online group of people. I don't have anything against these people, but we're just trying to do something different with Yakt. Anyway, Philip said that Rust is the programming equivalent of a vegan. It's a little bit like that. But I think as an older person who's growing older, I've seen more than one language go through this hype cycle. And 15 years ago, it was people were being this way about some other language, and I'm sure that 15 years from now, people are going to be vegan crossfitting about some new language. And it's just a natural process that, like, something new comes out, people get excited, and some people get a little too excited, and they think that other people should be as excited as they are, and so on. And it's just a human thing, and I don't think there's any point in being upset about it or offended or irritated, because it's just going to keep happening anyway. Let's see. Trubiso said, Rust has some nice features, but it throws you off in every way at the beginning. Sure, and that's fine. It's fine to do things differently, and I'm glad that many different languages exist so that we get to explore different approaches to things. I think we're all better off for that. There are some people feel that we should strive to find like the optimal language and then do everything with that, and I think there's room for more, I guess. Graham says, I feel like a language should be simple to write and just get your ideas to a minimum viable product. Let the language handle the fiddly parts, and you can come back and tweak them as needed. I kind of like that idea as well. And Yakt is definitely trying to be like pseudocode friendly almost, where you can write in a pretty fluffy way. It's pretty accepting, and we do away with a lot of ceremony. Like you don't have to have commas if you insert line breaks instead in your function calls, and you don't need semicolons everywhere and stuff like that. And just like a little bit airier, fluffier experience. And my hope is that it can become something that is almost as powerful as C++, but not, maybe missing like the last 10% of flexibility, but like trading that for a lot of comfort and convenience. We'll see. Let's see. Jared said, I think Rust is good for the programming language ecosystem and the evolution of programming. I imagine programming languages 50 years from now will differently from languages, and new ideas help pave. Sure. I think, honestly, in my view, every new language, whether it's a failed experiment or a huge success, I think every new language contributes to the ecosystem. Because we have to keep trying new ideas to see what happens, right? To see what works and see what doesn't. And the more people concentrate around one idea, the less blood goes into trying new ideas. And I like it when we try new ideas, I guess. Yeah, the word limit did you dirty there, Jared. Sorry about that, but I get I think I get the spirit of what you were trying to say. Trubiso said, I really like that Yakt looks very free in the sense that you can probably hack together a program in Yakt easily without hassle while being low level and having really nice features, for example, safety. Right. Yeah. So there are definitely frustration points. Like if you saw me doing the PNG decoder video, then it was very tricky to get like a big endian integer out of a array of bytes. That would have been a lot easier in C or C++. And I think we are missing some kind of primitive to make interacting with packed binary data. We need to make that easier somehow with some kind of primitive. I don't know exactly what, but there are some things like that where you just feel frustrated in Yakt and you want to drop down to a slightly lower level language. But I think if we can find the worst ones of those and solve them, then it's going to start feeling really free, and you'll be able to stay in that free feeling for a long time while using it. Ideally, you never drop out of that free feeling. Let's see. Dun, 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 dun. Let's see. Leif says, it looks like Yakt solves an actual problem. Hoping to indeed. My observation behind, or my observation that I try to always keep in mind with Yakt is that the vast majority of code that I write, that I've written in Serenity, and the most of the code that I look at in Serenity is not super complicated. And it doesn't use a ton of language features. And there's like a little nest of complex C++ feature usage in Serenity, and I'm glad that we have access to a lot of those features there. But that's a small part of the code base, and most of the code is pretty high level. We just happen to do it in a low level language, and I think you can raise the level of the language, eliminate a ton of possible bugs, while still being able to write basically the exact same code, just with safety guarantees. So that's what I'm trying to pursue. Anyway, let's see. Graham said the trade-off between functionality and simplicity is a big part. Having things be too simple, you can lose the ability to customize and expand. Yeah, so indeed. And that's why we have to actually try doing stuff with it. And I'm glad that the language is at the point now where I can try doing more complicated things, and I'm going to keep trying to do even more complicated things and seeing what feels frustrating, trying to fix that and so on. But me personally, like, I am growing quite excited about the language, especially when I tried using some other languages recently, and I just find myself feeling like, oh, I just want to go back to Yakt where things are so nice. Nico said, manually pulling out bytes with helpers seems nicer than casting memory and then swapping endianness in place, even in C, in my opinion. Yeah, right. It is pretty gross, the things that we do to byte streams in C, and maybe we should stop doing them, and having nicer helpers for things like that. It's, yeah, like I used to worry less about these things when I was younger, but as an older man, I don't like looking at reinterpret casts as much as I once did. Let's see. Jessica says, since match works on Boole expressions, have you thought of maybe removing if entirely and then an explicit pass continue if you don't need an else to help identify logic bugs? I have not thought about removing if entirely. So I like if. I don't really mind if. And match is neat, but I'm I'm often annoyed by match because it causes more rightward indentation drift. Because you get 2 levels of indentation with a match, right? So if you're matching on, let's match on 1 plus 1, right? And then say that you get 2, then you right here, and then now you are 2 levels of indentation removed from where you started the match. And maybe we should have an else case here. That's a bit funny that we need an else case. You could probably statically determine at compile time that this is exhaustive, but anyway, the if version of this, right? You are 1 level of indentation to the right when you start doing logic. And for that reason, I'm quite fond of if over match. And I try to use if over match in a lot of places. Like we have, for example, the enum value is foo, which is like syntactic sugar for this in Yakt. So here as well is another case of like avoiding the double indent from a match. The excessive rightward drift was definitely something that stood out to me about Rust when we started building the Yakt compiler, and they have since added some language features that allow you to drift less to the right, and I'm happy for them that they did that. But when we started, I remember we wrote the original Yakt compiler in Rust, and JT, who's very well versed in Rust, was just like showing how to do things, and like all the code was just like sliding to the right all the time. And to JT, this was totally normal, but to me, coming from languages that don't do that, it was really weird. So anyway, that's I'm getting off track. Let's see. Calculated risk taker said something there. Are there features in other languages that you would like to implement in Yakt? Yes, actually. Oops. Somebody brought up on a video, I forget, maybe it was Jessica actually. I think maybe it was Jessica who mentioned the checked and unchecked context from C# for integer overflow. And it just looks so nice the way that they handle this in C#, where you can just say unchecked like this. You make an unchecked block, and then integer operations inside of the block don't have overflow checking. And then if you want overflow checking, you make a check block. And then if this overflows here, it will throw an exception, which you can then catch. I think this seems like a really kick-ass way to annotate your opinion about integer overflows in programs. So when I was doing the PNG decoder, there were some sections where I need to allow integer overflow. And the way that we do that in Yakt right now is really cumbersome. So you have to basically say like, unchecked add a 456. Like that's how you add 456 to A, not caring about overflow. And obviously if you're gonna do like some chunk of arithmetic where you don't care about the overflow, that would get cumbersome. And being able to just say unchecked and then long expression without overflow checking, I don't know. I really like this, and I showed it to JT, who hadn't seen it either, and then said JT said that wow, that's just so obvious that that's how that should work. So it's been that's definitely something that I want to steal for Yakt. Anyway, there are more things. That's just the first thing that came to mind. Amir Hossein says, hi, how many RAMs running SerenityOS need? And minimum CPU? I can't run that. My computer stops working and I should restart it. I don't know. I would recommend at least 1 GB for running Serenity. so that you have room for running apps and stuff. It can boot with a lot less than a gigabyte, but I would recommend 1 GB. Minimum CPU, I think you need some kind of 64-bit Intel processor. And I don't know if SSE2 support is required. Or maybe that's mandated by x86-64. I don't remember. Anyway, you need about 1 GB of RAM, I would say, and a 64-bit Intel or AMD CPU. Or if you are working on the ARM ARch64 stuff, then you need some kind of ARch64 CPU. Nico said that having some read-packed struct with language support would be nice. Yes, it would be cool, right? And I think with the static reflection stuff that Ali has been building in Yakt, you could maybe even make that really nice. That's something that could use a little experimentation. Jason Watson says, what is your opinion on AI generating code? Something like training one with all open source code and then asking for new programs. Well, I think we're pretty far from AI writing code that can be trusted right now. It's very good at producing code that looks correct, but isn't, sometimes in subtle ways, sometimes in obvious ways. And it's just not a reliable programmer at this point, but I think it can be a very useful auto completion tool or like suggestion tool. But like code wholesale written by AI, I think that's still is definitely not available yet, right? As a tool. But I'm optimistic about the future of that stuff because I think it's better to be optimistic here. There's nothing good comes out of me having a negative perspective on stuff that other people are doing, stuff that I don't fully understand. And I'm just excited to see what they come up with and what they're able to do. And, you know, if the history of our industry is any indication, things are going to keep improving and they're going to be able to do more with less resources, and we'll see what happens. Let's see. Zvonimir says, hi, I'm late, but I have one question. How far is Yakt developed to start working on actual compilation, not transpiling to C++? Yeah, so the reason that we transpile to C++ is not because we can't generate native code. It's because we want to interact with C++ code. So we have Serenity, a whole operating system with hundreds of thousands of lines of code in C++, and we want to be able to interact with that code freely, even if that code uses C++ templates or concepts or crazy C++ features. We want to seamlessly be able to talk to it without having to build like a glue layer where we convert between APIs and stuff. So that's why we transpile to C++. It's not that we can't generate native code. It's that it's not relevant right now. It may become relevant in the future, but for the time being, like, we need that interop functionality of transpilation. Let's see. Andy said, just a little aside, ever since GDPR walls came about, I've been conditioned to reject tracking cookies. So when I see you instead clicking accept in your videos, it throws my head into a spin. I like to click on accept because I have like ad blocker anyway, and then I always think I'll accept your cookies, and then hopefully the ad blocker just swallows them anyway. So it's like I don't know. It just seems easier to go their happy path, and maybe they leave me alone instead of clicking reject and like the site being annoyed at me in some way that has consequences later, which it might not. I don't know. It's just it's a little subversive, I suppose, to have an ad blocker and say, I accept your cookies, but they will be blocked. Anyway. Dun, dun, dun. Philip H says, sounds like Rust has a similar issue to the old JavaScript callback hell where everything just gets more indented. Yeah, indented code is... I mean, there's that classic picture, the Hadouken indent. Like, we've all seen code that looks like this, right? And it is... I just want to fix it. Because when I see this, I always imagine, like, what if I have to actually understand what this does? How long would that take me? So many different ways this could go wrong here. Jessica said, yes, that was me. Checked, unchecked. I've needed this in C# before. Well, thank you for the tip about that. I think that is one of the nicest language features I have learned about recently. And I think you just have to implement it. It just looks so good. Let's see. SS Developer said, I don't know if anyone mentioned this yet, but in Zig, you can add with wraparound with +%. Yeah, I've seen those. They have like special operators for that. And I think that's probably a fine solution as well. But I rather like the very, very expressive style of like wrapping it in a context block, just like we have unsafe context blocks, and unchecked context block just makes it so clear, like which segments of the program are overflow checking free. Let's see. Sophia said, I played with ChatGPT for a while and it seems hard to make it do something clever, but I'm hopeful in AI too. Yeah, I mean, it can do a lot of cute little tricks and stuff, but at least in my view, they keep like censoring it. Because when it first came out, I was using it to make jokes about things like, make some jokes about my cat being fat. And it was happily doing that. And now it doesn't want to do that anymore. And you know, it's just countless. There are countless examples of like things that it refuses to talk about or discuss, or and some of them are like downright harmless things, and other things are arguably, you know, more controversial topics. But it seemed to me like they are just putting so much effort into sanitizing it that I kind of lost interest a little bit. Anyway, let's see. Christopher says, I feel like it depends on who writes the code for the indentation. Trubiso says, I feel like almost all of those indentations could be solved by inverting the condition in the if and returning early and then leaving the actual code in the normal indent level. Right. Yeah. Early return is like definitely nicer than this, right? Like if you have an error just return right away after printing the error. Just flip the condition and return. Let's see. Paul says the public release was nerfed and now someone applied a Reddit filter to it. Right. Yeah, and the same thing happened to the Bing AI thing, right? Like when that first came out, people were having pretty wild conversations with it, and I guess Microsoft applied some restrictions to it and to get to get it to stop doing that. Anyway, it is definitely an interesting space, and as I was saying, like I am optimistic, even though I also recognize that the current iteration of these things are they have very serious limitations and they're very unreliable. I think for me personally, like I have been able to use them as tools for inspiration quite a lot. So and by inspiration I mean like giving me new things to search for. So I've even tried stuff like pasting in a function that I'm working on and then asking like, can you explain what this does and give me some suggestions for how it could be better? And then it's just kind of interesting to see how it tries to break down what it does and then suggests some different optimization techniques or different data structures and stuff like that. and just stuff that I can then look for on Google, or I can Google it on Bing. Let's see. Zvonimir said, I heard many Rust people not happy with Rust's choice of unsafe keyword, and Yakt has same keyword. What do you think about that? Is that a real problem, and is there a better word for that concept? I do not believe that that's a real problem. I think just Rust is funny because just as they have so many vegan CrossFit super fans just spamming everybody about how great it is, there's also like a very dedicated hardcore hater group of people who just hate everything about Rust, and they just take every opportunity to crap on it. And I don't think that group really has taken the time to understand Rust. So many of them have like a lot of criticisms that you see repeated online again and again and again. Stuff that doesn't even make sense. And I think this misunderstandings of the unsafe keyword is one of those things that people keep repeating, that like, oh, well, if you look into any open source package that uses Rust, you'll find some unsafe here and there. And like, then what is the point? Like, then using those libraries is unsafe anyway. I've heard that argument so many times. And if you understand how unsafe works, you know that it's like, it's about like creating very limited scopes where you can do specific things that you can't do outside of those scopes. But that doesn't make like the whole library unsafe just because you have like a tiny little slice of it that does something carefully, hopefully correctly. But yeah, people, it's weird. It's really polarizing in a way, but it does seem like there are way many more people in the group that is unreasonably excited about it than there are in the people who are unreasonably angry about it. And my only opinion about this is that I really hope that none of the Serenity related projects ever get to the point where we have a mob of people going around telling everybody how awesome it is and that they need to stop what they're doing and use Serenity, or a mob of people that going around shitting on it just because that's what they want to do. I hope that we are able to remain small enough that it doesn't turn into that. Anyway, let's see. Turbiso says, will Yakt support things like unsafe? And then it's a dereference A equals 9. In order to avoid creating more indentation for one statement. I think we want to have unsafe expressions, but I don't know that unsafe like curly less is a good idea. So say that I wanted to call some unsafe API here, some unsafe func, right? I think this is not necessarily that great. I would rather still have a block, and then you would have to yield from that block, I guess. This just seems kind of magical to me, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. And you can kind of think the same about unchecked, right? Once we implement that. So like if you had something like that, an unchecked expression, no curlies. But then what if you do that? Then which part of this expression is unchecked? Like, is this unchecked or is the whole thing unchecked? Or I don't know. It feels a bit harder to reason about visually. People are suggesting YOLO instead of unsafe. Yeah, well, I guess you only do live once. Anyway, speaking of YOLO, it is 17:08, and I gotta go and live that YOLO lifestyle. So time to end the stream, but thank you all for coming and for all of the lovely chat and comments and things like that. And I really appreciate it. If you work on SerenityOS this weekend, come hang out on Discord. And once again, I want to highlight that we're going to do a community showcase. So if you have something that you've been working on in Serenity or something that you're working on right now, I'm going to make a video 3 weeks into next month, roughly. Check the community showcase channel on Discord if you want to be in that video. I'm hoping to get some longer videos with more in-depth explanations. And it's so much fun to see what people are working on, and so much fun to see people's faces when they talk about it. So I hope to see a bunch of them, and maybe even some new faces. Anyways, thank you all for coming. Check the community showcase channel on Discord. Have a great weekend. See you all next time. Bye bye.